A father is on trial after his son's school shooting.
A 14-year-old kills 4 people. Now prosecutors say his father helped make it possible. Can the law really do that?
Today, I'm not trying the shooter. I'm asking whether a parent can cross the line between tragic judgment into criminal responsibility. And at the end, I'll tell you exactly where I think that line is. Now the story.
In September 2024, 14-year-old Colt Gray allegedly carried out a mass shooting at Apalachee High School in Georgia. 4 people were killed. The son faces his own prosecution, but prosecutors also indicted his father, Colin Gray. Why? Because the state alleges that Colin purchased the AR-15 style semi-automatic rifle used in the shooting as a Christmas gift for his 14-year-old son. They alleged he supplied the ammunition.
And they allege he allowed continued access despite repeated warning signs. Those warning signs included
Discord messages referencing school violence that drew law enforcement's attention. Deputies who repeatedly advised the father to restrict the teen's access to firearms. Documented emotional instability. A reported shrine in the teen's bedroom dedicated to a known mass shooter, and a troubling message sent shortly before the attack, suggesting the consequences would fall on the father's hands. Colin Gray has pleaded not guilty. Now the legal spotlight shifts from the trigger to the parent.
And here's the uncomfortable question that decides everything. If deputies warned you, if threats were investigated, if fixation on school violence was known, at what point does "I don't think he'd do it" stop being a defense? That's the case. The state's theory is simple.
This was not unforeseeable. When law enforcement has already investigated your child for school-related threats, when deputies have advised you to restrict firearm access, when your child idolizes a mass shooter,
you do not buy that child an AR-15 style semi-automatic rifle, and you do not supply him with the ammunition.
The prosecution will argue this was not passive negligence. It was active facilitation of a foreseeable danger. And when you arm a foreseeable danger, you own the risk.
The defense will focus on causation.
Teenagers say reckless things online. Teenagers struggle emotionally. Teenagers become fascinated with dark figures.
That does not make them future mass murderers. They will argue that law enforcement investigated prior messages and made no arrest. They will argue the rifle was lawfully purchased for recreational purposes. And they will argue that Colt, the son, made an independent, deliberate decision to commit murder.
Under criminal law, an intentional act by another person can break the chain of liability. The argument is that you cannot imprison a parent for failing to predict the worst possible act their child might commit. This is the defense's firewall.
Now the cross-examination.
Now strip away the emotion. The law does not ask whether the father predicted the exact tragedy. It asks whether he grossly deviated from reasonable care. Was lethal violence a substantial and unjustifiable risk? If deputies advised firearm restriction, if threats were investigated, if fixation on school violence was visible,
is that enough to make the risk foreseeable? If not, what would ever be?
Because criminal negligence is not about hindsight. It's about ignoring obvious danger signals.
Under Georgia law, the charges include second-degree murder, involuntary manslaughter, cruelty to children, and reckless conduct.
The state must prove, number 1, a gross deviation from reasonable care. Number 2, disregard of a substantial and unjustifiable risk. And number 3, that the deaths were a foreseeable result of that negligence.
The defense must convince a jury that the shooting was a superseding act, which is an independent decision that legally cuts off responsibility. Here's my ruling. Yes, it's true, the son did not have it written on his forehead that he would commit a massacre. But prosecutors will argue in the trial that the writing was clearly on the wall. And if the evidence shows that deputies warned the father to restrict firearms, that prior threats were investigated, and that the father nonetheless purchased the rifle and supplied the ammunition, then the risk was not abstract. It was concrete. That crosses the line from tragic parenting judgment into criminal recklessness. I would convict on criminal negligence and involuntary manslaughter. Second-degree murder is aggressive, but if a jury finds that arming a clearly unstable teen made mass violence foreseeable, that charge can survive also. This case is not about punishing grief. It's about defining how far parental responsibility extends when warning signs are ignored. And that boundary is now being tested at trial. This is Crimes Digest, where crime news is cross-examined. If you want more legal analysis on the cases everybody is talking about, subscribe. See you in the next case.